Well, I'd say it's about time that this next guest stopped in our studios. Listeners to this station obviously don't know who Tom Allen is because they're glued to our classical music station. But if their fingers did do some walking on the dial, they'd find him hosting the delightful About Time program on CBC Music weekday afternoons. Tom, also a celebrated performer who will be both performing and celebrated this week here in Manitoba. He'll be traveling to Brandon University to receive an honorary degree and will also be performing one of his signature shows, a chamber musical called J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow, taking place in Brandon at the Lauren Watson Recital Hall. Tom will then return to Winnipeg to perform that show at the Eckhart Gramate Hall at the University of Winnipeg in a presentation by the Women's Musical Club of Winnipeg, alongside a star-studded cast of guest stars, which includes his partner, harpist Lori Gemmell. Ahead of all of that, Tom and Lori join us in the Classic 107 studios. So great to see you both.
Nolan, thank you so much.
Great to be here.
Oh, this is so exciting to see all of these different iterations of performance and celebration. Maybe I'll start with the degree here, Tom. What does receiving this degree mean to you?
Well, it's very humbling. It's very moving because it's a music school. It's exactly the kind of place that I went to learn about music a very long time ago. And to be able to address these, the class of 2025 from this storied school that's produced so many great Canadian musicians, it's deeply humbling. I'm honored and I'm thrilled, and I feel like there's a lot to say. We're in a time in the world when artists are increasingly under siege and increasingly valued, and this class of musicians is going to go out into the world and do things.
And share stories.
Share stories, play music, be artists, reflect art back to people, and try to be able to keep track of what's important. And so to be able to have a tiny part in that is really thrilling.
You've been contributing to the Story School amongst the Canadian classical music scene for a number of years now, being recognized, of course, in part for the rarefied air that you occupy in this country as a classical music storyteller and curator. For those who maybe don't know that story of how you came to be in this rarefied air, maybe you can walk listeners through a bit of that, your own sort of long walk in the musical snow to become the broadcaster and performer that is being celebrated.
Okay. First of all, I'm the descendant of preachers on both sides. So storytelling was kind of the currency of our family.
Sure.
I wasn't neither of my parents were musicians, nor their parents, but I went to a good school band program in Montreal and played the trombone and loved it, and decided that's what I wanted to do. And that worked out pretty well. I did okay. But at a certain point, it became clear to me that telling stories was the thing that I really did most naturally. And that really happened after being on tour with a brass quintet for 7 years. Mm-hmm. And when you're playing brass instruments, you get tired. You can't play constantly, like a harpist, for example.
Yeah, right.
So you need to take a break. And that's why almost every brass group has some kind of a shtick with patter and stories, because you're resting your chops. So I did that and realized, hey, I can do this. And things turned around pretty quickly from there.
All right. Now, Lori, when it comes to the collaboration between you and Tom, and not to mention your own storied musical career as well, how do stories, musical or otherwise, take shape together as you two create things like J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow, with the balance between two languages, in a sense, a very musical language curated, which we'll get to more in a second, but also the spoken language that especially Tom takes part in almost every single day.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that brought us together, actually. I separately in my career was in a women's group called Belladonna, and we were going towards bringing story and music together, like making that more and more important. And then when we met and we both had this idea that we wanted story and music to be a big drive in our life, we were like, woo, fireworks. And so a big thing that happens is that Tom says, what do you want to play? And and often it's a contemporary Canadian piece that I've been playing and I love and I feel a story in it. And so he writes a story to go with it. So that's how many of our shows have started. Not the J.S. Bach one.
I was just about to ask, how did?
Yeah.
Well, maybe even before we get to that, maybe I'll ask both of you. I'll start with you, Lori. Where did you first encounter the legendary story of J.S. Bach's long walk in the snow to see his idol, Dietrich Buxtehude? Do you remember this story?
No, it came from Tom.
It was all Tom?
I didn't know anything about it.
You know
before
where I
Tom.
first-
Where did you hear it?
I read about it in David Mason Green's excellent book, published in 1983 or 4, called A Biographical Dictionary of Composers, which I would highly recommend to you if you don't have a copy already.
Okay.
You can buy it online, for nothing, pretty much. I mean, the delivery is more expensive than the book. And it is fantastic. It's full of really vivid storytelling, really funny moments, really dry, a little bit smutty at times. And so it made this little mention of Bach walking, actually, I think he paraphrased what I've since learned was what C.P.E. Bach wrote in his dad's obituary. And that's how we know this really happened, because it says that he went to Lübeck, and then in the obituary that his son C.P.E. wrote, it said bracket zu Fuß, like by foot. So if you think about it, if your son, after you're dead, writes something like that, a little comment, it's significant. There's no way that he would just make that up. So that means the dad talked about this a lot for it to make it into the very last summation of his life. So that really was an interesting question. Why? First of all, why did he go there? And as you've said, he was going to learn from Buxtehude, but there was more. He was there for almost 4 months. He was only supposed to be gone for 4 weeks. And then when he came back, he started writing cantatas really quickly that became the thing we still celebrate. So what happened? And that's the reason for this show.
So then, as you're putting together this show, the pair of you, how do you go about asking the question, the why, when you are, maybe first we can talk about the selection of the music, and maybe Lori, you've got a little bit of insight into what happens on the inside for how these pieces are selected, because you talked about picking the music before and then having Tom come up with the narration.
This one's kind of the opposite.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the opposite.
Most of our shows
one,
are that way. Where
Fascinating.
where the music is first and we figure out a story that's going to work with it. But this is the opposite.
Yeah.
Cool. What happened?
Well,
I mean, I think it still kind of works the same way, because we take this show, we realized just the other day that we've performed it in every province except Saskatchewan now that we're playing in Manitoba. So that's next, if we can make
Awesome.
that happen.
and the fun thing is that everywhere we go, we hire musicians from locally.
Yes.
And so we're playing different Bach everywhere we go.
Yeah.
I mean, we have some set pieces that I've arranged, and I find a way to bring each new instrument into it.
May be surprising, but Bach didn't actually arrange any of his pieces for 20th century concert harp, violin, singer, piano, and muted bass trombone.
Yeah.
Right. Much less the singer that will be performing in this iteration of the concert on Friday night, which we'll get to.
Okay.
I will get to that in just a second as well. It's so interesting.
So the thing that we end up doing
putting that together
is I mean, I knew the sort of the beats of the story. And we'd get to the point where Bach is walking away angry. He's frustrated. This stupid little town doesn't understand him. They've treated him badly, and he's a 20-year-old hothead. So we need some angry music. So what's angry music? And we had our own choices, but in this case, Maddie Hildebrand gets to play angry music, and she picked something that she has, as it happens, by Bach. But a lot of times it's been something else completely different that has this feeling of anger and frustration.
Yeah, like one time it was Goodbye Jelena on the accordion.
Oh. Yeah, angry, angry for sure. Yeah. Is that like the prompt that goes out to the musicians in each of the communities?
I send them the script and it says angry music. You're
or love.
Or love music. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So then it takes a completely different sort of a look each time you perform it. I mean, really you performed it on the West Coast somewhat recently as well on Vancouver Island. As the sort of static performers in this, how do you approach the collaboration with these artists when you finally get together with them in the same room? Is there ever a point where you're like, ooh, that's maybe not the right shade of angry, or maybe that's
never happened.
Honestly,
never.
Like we've done this show probably 40 or more times, and that's never happened. It's always kind of exciting. People get it. I think that's the other thing is that musicians yearn for this kind of collaboration. And for somebody, they're used to the idea, especially if you're being hired by someone else, you're used to the idea that you're being told, we want you to play this, and the emphasis is on playing all the notes right and in time and whatever. And that's really not what this is about. We're saying, what's angry music to you? Or what's lovely music? Or we have this reflective spot and we want something by Bach. What have you got? And sometimes it's a thing that these players have had in their fingers forever. Other times they take the opportunity to learn something new. So it's really fun. It's been a real discovery.
So within that, it strikes me that you would have to be somewhat nimble, because when you hear these performers for the first time, and maybe something switches in maybe not in the story itself, but maybe in the cadence and the way in which you bring things out through language, which is not unlike being a radio host.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
that's really interesting to have to be that sort of. You have to have the structure, but then also you have to have that sort of soft shoe ability to navigate in and amongst the pieces. What is that experience like to get? I mean, obviously this is planned 90% ahead of time, but what's that like for that final 10% when you all are putting this
it's exciting.
together?
I mean, because
it's different every time.
Yeah,
everybody brings their own flavor and their own personality, and that shapes the story each time.
And it's also it's not in a bad way, but it's consuming. You're doing it. You're rehearsing. You only have 1 or 2 rehearsals maybe, so you're in it. And then it's not uncommon for Lori and I to sort of at the end of the rehearsal to say, "Oh, this is pretty cool." You hear that he did that? It was great back then. Whatever,
it's really
quite fun.
Yeah.
That is, it does sound like a lot of fun, and audiences will see that fun in action on Friday night. I'm especially intrigued. We mentioned this briefly, the pop component of this concert. Regular listeners of Classic 107 will know Madeline Hildebrandt and Carl Stobie quite well. I think they've both been in here in the last month, actually, now I say it out loud. But they might not be as familiar with Diaphony, who is an indie pop singer in the city of Winnipeg, quite active. What does having that sort of a component, first of all, why include a pop vocalist versus someone who has a bit more of a classical bent to their singing?
Well, I mean, there were a number of steps along the way how that happened, but what we've learned, again, having done this several times, is that and it's probably no coincidence that it's Bach. It's extremely adaptive. We both grew up in the era that we're in, hearing Bach played on the piano, an instrument that didn't exist for almost all of his life, or on arrangements for whatever brass quintets that wouldn't have existed. Like it's supremely adaptable and beautiful music that not only withstands arrangements but thrives in arrangements. I remember I've said several times, Bach's going to be fine. If we give this music love and value and respect, it's going to shine. So in the course of doing the show, the best example of the variety of vocalists was the tour you mentioned that we did just in March out in BC on the Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands. We had to split the 2 weeks between 2 singers. For the first week, it was Shruti Ramani, our friend who is how old is Shruti? Maybe not 30, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe 25.
And she was from Mumbai and came to Canada to study jazz after having studied Hindustani classical music. So she's a Hindustani classical trained jazz singer.
Wow.
Who has astonishing ability, chops, and just amazing ear, and can just read so clearly. And
she can use her voice like an instrument, as opposed to being a singer.
Right.
She's an instrument.
That's a beautiful distinction.
Yeah, and she has a really low, a very low contralto voice. And then the second week was Suzy LeBlanc, who's this silver-voiced soprano of Baroque heritage, who also has Akkadian music in her interests, and so they're opposites, really good friends, and we got to do the show with 2 of them for one time. So that was kind of a lesson which we'd already learned in various guises, but if the person has a musical soul and they're into it, it's going to be great. So Diaphony is a friend of my CBC radio colleague, Odario Williams, who's from Winnipeg.
Indeed.
And we were looking for a singer, and he said, well, what about Diaphony? And I called her up, and we listened to her songs. She's a beautiful singer. And she was completely game. She was all in.
Awesome.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well,
We'll have some fun.
I will see. That the approach is just still such a refreshing thing to contemplate. As you've been putting together J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow for all of these different iterations, maybe we'll start with you on this question, Lori. How has the story maybe changed perspectives for you the more that you've performed it? Or has it?
Well, I guess I just more and more see Bach as a person. Somebody who developed over time and learned all the hard lessons like we all have to learn.
Okay. Yeah. The learning would come if you were walking that far to try and find it. Learning, quite literally.
Yeah.
What do you, and you know what, maybe I'll ask both of you this question as well. And Lori, maybe I'll start with you on this one. What do you take away from this kind of project where you have to be kind of nimble and not knowing quite what to expect? What do you take away from that into the rest of your artistry?
It's like finally, because that's how I grew up. I grew up not in like a really rigid classical, you got to practice family. I grew up exploring music in a really free way, and then came into, my rigid classical training because I needed to be able to do that to be, as proficient as I can be. And so now it's brought my two loves of music together and having fun.
It's a hard thing to break for some performers, though, I would imagine, too, this idea of the rigidness.
Well, yeah, so
that you were
some
speaking
people
of.
come with the concern, that they don't understand what it is that we're asking of them, but everybody has loved doing it. And everywhere we go, we build a community, and that's been so satisfying.
And the story, I think, really helps in that. This is where story and music really work together, because performers may initially approach Bach. I mean, Bach is he's the holy grail of music for Western classical music. So it can be intimidating. What if I'm not honoring it? But as we're telling the story and living with this story, as Lori said, you start to get to know him, and you realize, yes, he was like a more and more unbelievable musician with every show. These pieces are so beautiful. They're so, even just a little throwaway loose change. These are not like the major achievements of his life. They're just little pieces, and they're unbelievably great. And he was a guy that had a lot of trouble with other things, and he was trying to figure it out. And he was 20, and he hadn't started composing yet. And he's having problems with management, and he goes to this place, this Lubeck, which is bigger than any place he's ever been, and he's a nobody there. He's a complete unknown. He's not the giant of music. He's just a young guy who got in trouble. He's a hothead, and he's trying to figure out what he's got to do.
Yeah, huge origin story moment.
Yeah, so it is that you get to know him, and there are all kinds of fun little hints as to what he was like. Once you start looking, there's tons of stuff there.
We mentioned what Lori takes from this back into the rest of her musical practice. Maybe Tom, what do you take away from these kind of performances into your work as a storyteller on a daily basis in radio?
Well, that's a good question. It's all part of the same spectrum for me, but I will say that there is a tremendous difference between doing what I do on radio and you every day in saying, I need something fast. It's got to be really good. Here's this, boom. And you're working with recorded music. It could be recorded in 1952. It could have been recorded yesterday. It's just a thing that's there, and we go to it to illustrate a point, and it's immediately accessible. When you're working with real musicians, it's not as immediately accessible because people have to do what they have to do, but it's also alive. It's not a little cutout illustration that you stick in your story and it's always the same. It's different every time, and it becomes something else. It becomes part of the story. So if I'm boosting some moment of a love moment in the story, and I go into it a certain way, that musician is going to take that and do something with it, and that's profoundly rewarding.
What do you both hope, we talked about what you take away from this project, what do you hope the audience member who was maybe like you when you were starting out, maybe when you're Bach's age and you're trying to figure out what your musical voice is, what do you hope that person takes away from seeing this show?
Just to be themselves.
Right.
Yeah, be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been more profound if I tried. J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow takes place on Friday, May the 30th, 7:30 at the Eckhart Grammatik Hall at the University of Winnipeg. Before that, it takes place Wednesday night at the Lorne Watson Recital Hall in Brandon. You can find out more information at wmcwpg.ca. Lori Gemmell and Tom Allen, such a delight to welcome you both to the Classic 107 studios, and all the best for these performances, and congratulations to you, sir, on your honorary degree.
Thank you, Nolan.
Thank you.
It's a delight to see you here. I'm glad this is going so well. It's really an honor to be here.